first of all, thank you for joining me, and very, very excited to talk to you. It's been a while since we've talked, and although we have a lot of experience, we together we do need to catch up a little bit and catch up with your current story and where you're headed right now. So for in front of the audience, my introduction to you was probably around back in 2018, 2019, when we started working with you with the agency. And, when I first got introduced to you, your main services were around, what we worked on together was restructuring and rewriting LinkedIn profiles for different kind of professionals, different kind of industry leaders. And from what I can see on your LinkedIn profile, obviously you have a lot of experience with outreach and copywriting. And obviously this is where we overlap with the storytelling structures and the storytelling tips and rules that you apply to copywriting. So but before all those experiences and before the outreach, I also noticed some sales experiences back in the days that you have had. So let me start you off from there, because I also started my professional journey as a sales guy, whether it's real estate, whether some insurances, but I got introduced with being a salesperson. Let me know how your professional journey started, and like what was it on these sales positions that you had.
So I didn't know that you also started in sales. I learned something already. That makes a lot of sense, though. Yeah, so I sort of fell into sales by accident. I was one of those kids, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was interested in a lot of things. And I worked in a coffee shop all through high school and college. And when the coffee shop was closing, because it was in a dying mall in our area and blah, blah, blah. And the rent kept going up and the foot traffic didn't. So the owner decided to close the coffee shop. One of our suppliers asked me to come work for them because they wanted to expand their territories and they needed somebody who was a little bit further east in New Jersey. And they asked me if I would come and do it. And I knew nothing about sales, like literally absolutely less than zero. But I said yes and went and started that. And that was the very beginning of my sales career. From there, I did a few things for myself with some sponsorship sales and things like that. And then ended up moving to Atlanta and getting into software sales. And that was really the springboard. That was a springboard for a couple of things. That's where I got my first real sales training, which was very helpful. But we didn't do a whole lot of outbound in that particular role. So I'd done some previously, with the other types of sales jobs that I had. And we didn't do much there. And there were elements where we really would have benefited from that training and from that being part of our approach to sales. I thought it was like the most cake sales job in the world, though, at the time. Like, well, I don't have to source my own leads. This is amazing. I was obviously young and didn't know any better. That I could have been bolstering those numbers if I was doing this other stuff. Yeah. And a couple things happened there. One, that's where I learned that I didn't want to be sitting in an office for 9 to 5. Like absolutely 1,000%, I was not cut out for that. I'll spare you the rabbit hole of why right this very second. But I learned that very, very clearly. It also became the springboard for a lot of my copywriting stuff. And it was sort of where I crystallized around the idea that I need to figure out what I can do for myself to get myself out of an office environment. Because it was very different than my other sales jobs where I was on the road, I could sort of make my own schedule, this and that, to I was sitting in an office from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day because we needed phone coverage. So it felt a lot more in some ways like a glorified secretary's role when it was like the reason you're stuck at your desk is because the phone might ring for somebody trying to sell you office supplies. So it became very much a crucible for the direction I ultimately ended up going. But
okay, I wanted to ask you something on this side of being on the desk and like calling people, you either cold calling or trying to sell them through the phone. One of the sales positions I was on was the same, like cold calling and trying to connect with people who know absolutely nothing about you. You're a complete stranger to them. And the main thing that, the main lesson that I remember I carry with myself to this day is that you have to find a way to relate to those people in one way or another. And it's much more difficult when you're on the phone, obviously, when you cannot see them face to face, and especially if you're calling people outside of your country. This is whole different culture, whole different lifestyles, and finding something to relate to them is very difficult. Like, did you go through the same stuff on this position, and like what were the main burdens in being a salesperson then?
Less, I went through a little bit less of that because we didn't do any outbound. We didn't do any outbound calling or emailing. But we would have people calling in. And so then you're quickly trying to help them figure out if what we offered was for them, if we could help them, if it made sense to schedule a demo with them or send them some other information or what they might need. And even when we demo, this is pre-Zoom, right? Like,
yeah.
Skype existed, GoToMeeting existed, but it was very, very, very rare that anybody showed up on video for those. It was really for the purpose of screen sharing, which was interesting. When I look back on it, interesting, right? In a post-COVID world where, when everything hit the fan in 2020 and everybody had to go virtual and people are freaking out about to turn their video on or to not turn their video on and how hard it is to make connections without your video on, I'm like, to me, I'm like, it's really not. I've been doing that for my entire career up to this point because we didn't have video way back when, you kind of learn how to just, one of the biggest tips that this didn't necessarily come from sales, or from that particular sales role. I don't know where I picked this up on, but it's so true that when you're smiling, when you're talking to people, they can hear it.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that I learned, one of the things I had really struggled with in sales and when demoing, especially as I was learning our product, was when people would ask me a question, not knowing the answer or feeling like I'd answer them right away. And one of the best tips that somebody completely outside of my sales realm gave me for that was to basically imagine space in front of me. Like I had this whole space that I could take before I answered the question. It's essentially space to think. But for some reason, that visualization of there being space between me and the question, that really helped. I can't even explain why that was so impactful for me, but it totally changed the way I demoed, the way I interacted with people on calls, in a very positive way.
First of all, one of the biggest advantages of having those episodes is actually continuously learning new stuff. So thank you for showing me something new to learn today. But the other thing that stood out to me is, sounds like these sales positions were the introduction to a couple of the main things that you need to learn in marketing. First of all, knowing your audience and qualifying those leads, whether they can even benefit from your product or your service, or if they're not fit at all. And the second thing that you mentioned is the way you have to always know your product, know its advantages, its disadvantages, in order to actually meet the criteria and see if the target audience can again benefit from it. So knowing your target audience and knowing your product as a whole. Did you recognize this back in the days, or is it something now that when you go back you realize that it's a lesson in disguise?
I don't think I recognized it at the time for what it was, but quickly as I started moving into finding clients for myself and doing, freelance work outside and all of that, I recognized a lot of the lessons that I had learned there through demoing with people, like the sales training I had and things like that, just how handy that was coming in not only for, I don't know that the sales training helped my marketing skill set as much. In reverse, I ended up wishing that I had had my marketing training when I was in sales, because it would have helped me tremendously. Especially, I came to sales first. I came to sales, I wasn't even done with college yet when I started in sales. And so I was as green as could be without any real training, without any mentors at that point. And the marketing training would have helped me a lot. So it's almost in reverse. I wish I would have had the marketing training to inform the sales work, but the sales work and the sales training became so incredibly important to me. And I still see this pattern. Freelancers who are going out on their own are so uncomfortable with selling and have no idea how to sell. And what they think of as selling is often not really what it is, or not what is going to benefit them. Like they think selling is somehow inherently like pushy or something else, when really it's selling is problem solving to me. That's how I always approached it, because that's how I buy. And it always just made sense to me to sell the way I like to buy.
Yep, nicely put. Like it's something like before being in sales and after being in sales, you recognize that we have tainted this word. A salesperson, selling to people. As you mentioned, you always imagine somebody pushing something in your hands that you don't want it at all. But everything, it's a sale essentially. Like you're selling to your boss this current project, this current idea that you have. You're selling your kids or your parents an idea, something that you want to do for the holidays, something that you need to communicate and to, as mentioned, solve. If it's a problem, to solve it. If it's an idea, to communicate it and to see if it's fit for you or not, right? And to move on to actually following this hero journey structure that I've mentioned, you introduced us to this initial setting of you being in those sales positions, and this is where it clicked to you. Okay, I don't want to sit in front of the screen from 9 to 6 and have this office job. So basically, as we have it in the hero structure, this is the second step of the hero recognizing like they are not feeling comfortable. They're destined for more. They're destined for something legendary. So they have to go through those obstacles and to take that journey, right? How was the transition from being in this office job to moving on to the marketing stuff and being an outreach expert at some point?
Largely accidental.
Okay.
My main motivation, let me set the stage a little bit for that piece of like, I grew up on a farm in New Jersey. In the 80s and 90s, my parents, so this is long before remote work and, any of that was trendy or even really a thing. Like this is very, very early days of the internet for the most part, and pre-internet for some of it. My parents had like these completely unusual schedules. They were both in real estate to some extent. They did real estate appraisals, and then my mom became like a tax collector and a tax assessor. And so she had a full-time role essentially. Like she never had to really maintain full-time office hours. Maybe when I was really little, but for most of my memory, she never maintained full-time office hours, even though she essentially had a full-time salary, piecing together these small towns out where I'm from. They didn't need somebody sitting in their offices 9 to 5. They needed somebody for a few hours a week here and there. And then there's field work that you did in between and stuff like that. So she worked for many towns, had a really nice career out of that, and a ton of flexibility. My dad, similarly, always had a lot of flexibility, was always around. He was a real estate appraiser. He worked for himself. In the early days, they both had a common mentor that they worked for, but they were around a lot. And so, coming from that background, I think I was doomed from the get-go. Like there was no way I was going to be able to sit in an office full time, just no way. And then, there's a huge farm outside. I have 4 horses and, a small circus that follows me around that needs my attention. Like, there's no way. Even like that short stint in Atlanta, I wasn't going to survive in the city like that. Like, I had too much other stuff I needed to do. And so probably around 2011 or 2012, I stumbled into Ramit Sethi's work. And he had a course at the time called Earn 1K. And that really set me on the track to figuring out like how I was even going to turn my skills into a business for myself. And so I started, I took the course and I started doing a little bit of freelance work and stuff like that. And I thought that I was going to end up doing more marketing type. I mean, cold email is marketing, but I thought I was going to do a little bit more content marketing stuff because I'd been really instrumental in getting HubSpot implemented at our company. And I mean, so I was kind of immersed in that. And I was kind of the bridge between sales and marketing for our team. And I really thought that's what I was going to be doing when I left sales and started taking on clients. And it turned out what people really wanted from me was my cold email expertise, which I had started honing because another friend around that same, well, probably earlier than that, this friend of mine had been feeding me like sales information and marketing information on the side for like years. And he's really the one who introduced me to direct response marketing. And so I started learning about that kind of midway through this software sales role. I started applying that a little bit. And like it all just sort of started coming together really at the same time with like 3 or 4 different guides, so to speak, giving me different pieces of the puzzle. And then there was an agency that reached out to me, a cold email agency, and they really needed a new copywriter. The folks they had who'd been writing for them, I guess, were getting a little burnt out. And, the woman who actually hired me into the role said something to the effect of, there's only so long you can do this for before it all just starts to look the same and you start to burn out on it. And I've lost touch with her over the years, but I often wish, like, when I reach out to her and be like, Alice, guess what? I'm still doing this. And it's like, well,
You
over
are
10
wrong.
years later. Well, about me, like she was right in picking me because she wanted somebody who lived it. And anyway, all those things just sort of converged at the same time. And it really shot me off to, I don't really have time to do much else other than write cold email for people. Like that is the business.
That's something very weird. Like, just want to state the remark. It's not something a lot of people tell you are supposed to burn out from this. You're supposed to be tired from this. You're supposed to have all of those feelings and feel this certain way because they go through this specific feeling or they go through this specific experience and they think that it's universal. It just bugs me that people don't put at the end of the sentence, but this was for me. This is how I felt for me, right?
Well, that had been her experience with a bunch of the folks that they had hired who had written for them. She came by the opinion. She wasn't trying to project. But yeah, I know what you mean, though. A lot of advice out there is very like, it's all or nothing as opposed to different things for different people, right?
And something else that's actually funny from the previous episodes that I have recorded, all of them mentioned seeing some kind of course on the internet, signing up for it, but you're the first one who actually found benefit from the course itself, because the previous guys told me, I found this course, I started going through it, and on the second stage I was like, nope, I'm going to do it myself, I'm going to experiment, I'm going to the trial and error stuff. So again, I'm happy that on this journey there was another course involved, but obviously this one was a little bit more practical, I suppose, or worked for you in this case.
Yeah, I think it was so long ago now, but I think part of what made that course so effective was the fact that its purpose was really to cut out all the nonsense that people do before actually getting into the meat of starting a thing. So it was really meant to keep you from spinning your wheels on stuff that doesn't matter and get you right into the action pieces that actually move the needle forward for you and get that momentum going. So there was no, you need a logo, you need a website, you need this, you need that. It was very much like cold email 5 people and get a client.
You're kind of giving the recipe for a successful, course, like cut the BS, keep it straight to the point, start selling.
Yeah, really. I mean, that's the secret formula to everything, isn't it?
Pretty much. But I want to get your opinion on a little bit more secret formulas that I have jotted down from your content. And simply because one of the things that stood out to me, and from my experience, starting from sales even, now it's one of those moments that when you look back, this is something that's clear as the day, but sales experiences, marketing experiences, your content as well talks about whenever you write something, whenever you create a specific campaign, make it for them. And we get back to this key factor, this key element, relevance. Like, how exactly do you make something for the person? How do you personalize your campaigns?
It's so funny because right now relevance is such like a buzzword in cold email. And, back during COVID, it was empathy was the buzzword. And every time I'm like, what were you people doing before? Like, this is not new. And I think that's really, when it comes to how do you turn those stories into things that are relevant for the person who is receiving them, I don't do a ton of personalization in the cold emails that I personally write. They can be personalized, absolutely. But typically what I'm looking for is this list is going to be built in such a way that this email will make sense for them. We know that if they are on the list that you put together, they are somebody who should be a candidate for this by any way we can identify from the outside. Obviously, unless you have an internal source, you don't know until you reach out and ask. But then I look for those common threads. Like when I work with founders, for example, they rarely created a company just because they woke up and decided it was a great idea one day without having any industry experience or like personal pain with whatever problem it is they're trying to solve. So normally their story maps very, very well to what their market is experiencing.
So would you say that you're actually starting off from the specific audience and trying to get under the hood and go through their subconscious and their experiences? Or
yeah, I start with the founder, like, why does this company exist? And if we have different sub verticals that we're writing to, then it's like, okay, well, what is it? What are the pain points here? Like, what is it that they're going through every day that makes this thing make sense for them? So yeah, I do want to go through and see what is going on with them. And that tells me how to frame up what we're going to say in the email and make it make sense for them.
So something, this is an approach that I apply to most of the time when I'm writing content for LinkedIn profiles, my profile, whatever the case is. But again, sticking to this hero's journey, obviously we introduce the hero, we introduce the main problem, we introduce the mentors, and usually the service that I will offer or the product that I will offer gets into this role of the mentor. Like, let's say I'm trying to sell to you. You will be my hero. I will introduce to you this specific, the current situation that you are in, and then I'll present to you this ideal scenario when at the end, you win, you get the castle, you get the horses in the garden and everything. Would you say that there's something similar as an approach to you?
Yeah. As you were repeating it back to me that way, I'm like, oh yeah, problem, agitation, solution. Yes. My very favorite framework ever. Almost every single email I write follows that thread to some extent or another.
Okay,
100%.
And this is the good thing about marketing, right? If you stick to the basics, to the fundamentals, most of the time your campaign will be successful.
Yeah. Most of the trendy things ultimately break down to the fundamentals when you're like, all right, it's really just this. It just has a new name on it.
True. All right, because actually we are, getting ahead of the time. We went through the couple of stages of the journey, and actually you walked with me very gracefully. Obviously, we introduced the main challenges. You also mentioned a couple of your mentors and your guides, which I'm going to, get more information from you on their content and where I can get them after the call. But going back in the years and going back through your memories, there are certain stories that stood out to you. Like, for example, for me, I'm not sure if it's the story itself, if it's the actors or whatever the case is, but for example, Lord of the Rings is something that I can watch over and over and over again. Yes, I'm from the modern kids that watch the movie and then read the book. But when you go back on your timeline, is there a specific story either from your childhood, for example, or from your later teenage years that always, it always pops in your head and brings a good memory to you?
Yeah, but I don't know how this is going to tie back to a marketing lesson. It was a book from when I was a little kid. Hang on. Called Those Terrible Toy Breakers.
Okay, it's right next to you.
I found a copy of it not too long ago, and it hasn't been put away. It's been sitting there on my stack of books. But the scenery reminded me of my grandmother's house, which is where we would read the book. Ultimately, the toy breaker and the kid they all become friends. It's a lion, a tiger, and a bear who are playing with these things, and they're just too big and they accidentally break them. I don't know if there's a marketing lesson there, but I just loved that book. So when I found it, I pilfered it from my mom's collection and brought it to my place.
The connecting the dots between this specific book and finding the marketing nuggets out of it might be a little bit difficult, but I will go through it, see what is it about, because it's not something that the Balkan household over here is familiar with. We have
I don't know if
chapters
anybody
started.
else is familiar with this book. I've never heard another single person reference it. As far as I know, this could be the only copy in existence for all I know.
Oh, well, keep on to it.
Probably not, but I don't know. The author's
Um,
name is David McPhail, so I'll send you a picture after.
Please do. We have it on the screen as well, so I'm going to go over it. But I want to close off this episode by saying that, like, first of all, thank you for taking us through your journey. Obviously, for your experience, there's a lot more nuggets that we can take and a lot more stories that we can, listen to and learn from. But will be for another call. That I'll be excited to join the conversation with you once again. Thanks for sharing the cool childhood story that's close to your heart, because this is something that not a lot of people feel comfortable sharing, and I do appreciate it every time somebody does it. So again, thank you. Thank you for joining this episode. I really appreciate talking to you once again, and hope to hear from you soon enough.
My absolute pleasure. It was so good catching up.
Great. See
Thanks,
you.
Nico.